Section 4.2, Graphing Linear Equations. This is part 2, so let's take a look at how to actually graph a linear equation, straight line, and what I'll ask you to do on your test would be the same directions as we have here, which is graph, and we want to label 3 points. So what I have is we have our first example, y is equal to x plus 3, and I've made a table, and what we want to do is we want to pick 3 x values, input them into our equation, and then get our answer for y. So the 3 values for x could be any 3 points that you want. Just make sure that you pick easy values or easy numbers to work with, like 0, 1, and -1. So in this case, we'll start with 0, and we substitute it. And we have 0 plus 3, which gives us a y value of 3. This gives me an ordered pair to graph, 0, 3. So let me go ahead and graph that. That would be right here. And by the way, this is a y-intercept. Next, substitute 1 plus 3, which gives us a y value of 4, which gives me an ordered pair, 1, 4. So here's 1 and go up to 4. And then last x value, -1 plus 3, and that gives me a y value of 2. Our ordered pair is -1, 2. Here's -1, go up to 2, so I have a point right here. Make sure that the 3 points line up. They should always line up. If you make a mistake, then you'll know because the 3 points will not line up. And the last thing you want to do is just make sure you connect your points with a straight line, and then we just want to put arrows at the end of our graph like this. So that's our first example. One quick thing to notice is that the equation is solved for y. This equation is in y equal to mx plus b form. This is the best way to have your equation solved for y if you want to graph. Next example. It says x minus 6y is equal to 12. So in this, if we look at this equation carefully, it is not solved for y. Therefore, I say solve for y first. So I did most of the work. In order to solve for y, subtract x from both sides, and then we're left with -6y equals -x plus 12. Next, in order to isolate y, we need to divide every single part of the equation by -6. Since you're dividing by a negative number, please be careful with the signs. So we're going to get y equal to -x over -6, that's a fraction, becomes positive. And what we want to do is write this as 1 over 6x, where the x is in the middle. Minus, we have 12 divided by -6. Reduce, you get -2. Our equation is now in the best form for us to fill in our table. So a couple things here. 0, notice that I chose 0 again because that's always very easy to work with. I also picked 6 and -6. Why did I do that? Well, because if I input 6 or -6, notice that you could reduce and the fraction will go away. If you happen to choose another number like 1 or -1, you will end up with a fraction, and then we have to graph fractions. So when you graph a fraction, you have to estimate it on your graph. If you can avoid fractions, it's probably better to do that. So 6 is a good number, -6 is a good number. What else is a good number? 12, because 6 goes into 12. You could do -12. So you want to pick a number for x that 6 divides. Let's see what we get for our table. we have 1 over 6 times 0 minus 2. Well, 1 over 6 times 0, that's just 0, so we're just left with a negative 2. Then we have 1 over 6 times 6 minus 2. You can write 6 over 1 if you want, but notice that I can reduce. So when you reduce, what are we left with? We're just left with a 1 minus 2, and that gives us a negative 1. Last number to substitute, we have 1 over 6 times negative 6. You can write over 1 minus 2. Well, this just gives me negative 6 over 6, which is negative 1 minus 2. That gives us negative 3. We now have 3 ordered pairs. Let's go ahead and graph them and connect them, and then we have our graph. So we have 0, negative 2, another y-intercept, 6, negative 1, 6, negative 1 right here, and negative 6, negative 3. So here's negative 6 and negative 3. So right here. By the way, graph paper is really helpful when you're doing this. So now we just want to connect these, and then we are done. So connect them, get our line, and that's it. So done, example 2's done. Here's example 3. Okay, example 3, slightly different from the first 2 examples. Let's look at this equation carefully. This equation, if you notice, only contains the variable x. It does not contain y. So if you have an equation that only contains x or only contains y, then you will have either a vertical line or a horizontal line. So the first thing that you want to do in this case is solve for x. X is the only variable we have, so we're going to solve for x. Once we solve for x, then we can see how to graph. I will show you how to graph. So the first thing is subtract 9 from both sides, which gives us negative 4x equal to negative 9. One more step, divide by negative 4, both sides. Make sure you simplify, your fraction becomes positive. So this is x is equal to negative 9 over 4, or rather positive 9 over 4. So what we want to do now is, this is a fraction. So what you want to figure out is, what is the decimal for 9 over 4? So if you actually divide this out, you should get that 9 over 4 is equal to 2.25. So if you happen to have a fraction, change it to a decimal because it's easier to graph. All right, so since it says x equals, I'm going to have to go to my x-axis. And let me just mark the axis here, put some points for y. All right, so where is 2.25? 2.25 is between 2 and 3, so we just estimate that point. That would be right here. So I'm going to put a dot between 2 and 3. If you just have x, like this, x equal to 2.25, this corresponds to a vertical line. It is not slanted, it's just a vertical line. It looks like this. So what happens is, I do want you to label 3 points. But how do we label 3 points? Well, I already have 1 point here. You could put another point here and another point here. So what are those ordered pairs? Well, the x value is always 2.25. What's the y value here? It's 2. You could have also chosen this point, which is 2.25 comma 1. It doesn't matter, just need 3 points. And let's label this third point Remember, the x value is always the same, 2.25. The only thing that changes is your y value. The y value here is at -2. And so we have our graph. Anytime you have an equation that only contains x, that corresponds to a vertical line, and it goes through the x-axis. Example 4, last example. We have an equation that contains just y. All right, so I have solve for y. All right, so let's do that. The first step, -10. Which gives us -2y equal to -10, and divide by -2. Y is equal to 5. Okay, this is my equation that I need to graph. So y is equal to 5. That needs to go on the y-axis. So what happens is I just have three points here, so I need to have 2 more. So I can put this in the correct place. Let's do that now. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is going to be a point. And then what happens is y equal to a number is a horizontal line. So my graph will look like this. And I just need 3 points. Well, I could put them anywhere. Here's a point. Here's another point. Let's label our points. This first one, x is 3, y is 5, 3, 5. This one says x is -2, y is 5. So notice the y value will always be 5 and the x value changes. So anytime we have y equal to a number, it will always be a horizontal line.